Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this presentation on the future of bilingual education. My name is Jesus Garcia Laborda, and I'm here because I haven't been able to travel to Turkey in the very last minute. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hussein Usumboylu for the invitation to be here with you. I've been in the last 4 or 5 editions of this conference, so obviously I'd say it's a major pleasure for me to be with you. The second thing, obviously, I want to introduce myself. As you can see in there, I have a personal profile. In the Web of Science, I have, as it says in there, 93 items, and also in Scopus. But in reality, the question is, who is Dr. Garcia Laborda? And the answer is very simple. It's someone who likes traveling the world. It's someone who likes meeting new people. It's someone who actually enjoys working with other people. So what is the topic of this conference that I'm going to be addressing today? Bilingual education. For many of you, bilingual education is an elite issue that has been around for very many years. It actually began almost 40, 50 years ago in Canada, where they had a problem in the province of Quebec. In Quebec in those days, the French community had real problems because they were not educated in their own first language. And then basically what happened is that there was a huge move towards integrating bilingual education in the general curriculum. Obviously, this has moved back in the 90s in the United States. Jim Cummings in California has done an extensive study on different programs that were working, especially dual bilingual education. We understand by dual bilingual education as the one that integrates both people who speak one language and then people who speak the other one in which it is integrated. But the question today is, how is bilingual education increasing? Obviously, it's increasing powerfully because places like China, Hong Kong, and many other places in the world have an increasing presence of English, especially English, obviously, in their own educational, working, laboral system. My presentation will be dealing not so much with the principles of bilingual education that probably you will be able to see in other presentations in this conference, but instead on what is the future, what are the things that we want to study in the future. Okay? Bilingual education, therefore, in the world has a single mission, which is prepare children to become more productive citizens through a high-quality education. In countries like Spain, for instance, about 70 to 80% of the students in primary education are educated in bilingual principles. This is also reflected in this little booklet. It's in Spanish and English, but you might be able to get access on it on the internet very easily to see what the previous council projects had done in Spain since I could say the end of the 80s to 2010. But there are other books like Multilingual Education, which also bring products that were produced in Canada and the United States. And obviously in the journal of Tojet, for instance, which is Turkish, you will find also other experiences on bilingual education that might be very interesting for you. So the following question is, what are we going to do in this presentation? Well, the mission of this presentation is to show the needs of valid current research in education and bilingual education, which is usually limited to just a few excellent researchers. What is my perspective towards this? That by showing an increase in current research, we can improve and see the limitations and good practice to unify what is done in Spain and elsewhere. Okay. It's not very unusual to come across news like this one. I'm going to translate what you have in front of you. The students in primary education that had been grown in bilingual education obtained worse scores in standardized testing than those in regular classes. Now the question is very much, how was this and many other researches like similar to this one done? As you can see in there, this research was intended to show that not all the schools can become bilingual. This is a common trend, and many schools have been criticized because they leave aside some kids in their content areas, such as maths, language, sciences, social sciences, etc. Now the question is, if we actually get papers like this one that address that bilingual education shouldn't be supported, which is common in many parts of the United States and many other parts of the world, it's crystal clear that the results will be certainly biased towards not getting the results. This may also happen in Turkey, especially in some areas. It also happens in many other parts of the world. For instance, bilingual education is excellent in Norway, but nevertheless the governments don't want to support it as much because they really believe that streamline, for instance also in Austria, the streamline education is more important in reality than any other thing. But let me move forward. In this sense, these and other studies are based on the achievement of traditional subjects, let's say maths, let's say language, and so forth. But the difference do not change the way we support it. That means, if we are actually testing students in bilingual education in Spanish, they may have a little, and I mean a little, worse grades than those who actually have been studying in English. That means, how about if the tests were done and delivered in English instead of being delivered in Spanish? Or, let's say in a different way, how about if students in very good programs, bilingual programs, were tested specifically on the things that they have learned in the bilingual classes? Obviously, we all understand that the results would be totally different. So therefore, the support for bilingual education should come first from the state, second from the regional administrative and educational authorities, and then, as you can see in here, it also depends on the parents' influence. We also recognize those people who are in research in bilingual education. We also recognize that somehow there is a little deficiency in teacher skills, which also prevents students from achieving real high results. This is crystal clear in here, okay? This is an example of the Spanish education. I'm going to translate. It is self-evident that none of the students in the bilingual program gets worse scores than according in their reading capacity in Spanish language. That means that they very much get the same scores in both languages. However, they underscore in just a little section of the exam. Obviously, there are some other things, some negative aspects that have to be revised over time. That means students in bilingual education tend to have similar scores to their counterparts only in monolingual classes. As a conclusion of this and many other studies like this one, we can conclude that obviously, students in bilingual education have a double opportunity. First, they are going to be scoring almost the same as their counterparts in the first language, and the second, which is even more important, they will have more professional opportunities for development than those people or those students who are actually in monolingual classes. Therefore, what are the aspects to study now and in the near future? As I mentioned before, I don't want to get into the reality, the current reality of any single country that is actually attending the conference, the LINELT conference. But I want to suggest lines that can help you to research in the future and to get published in many other journals, and especially to help and cooperate with the local administration to improve the situation in your schools. So we have seen some important aspects. Before, it's important to build in the past to be able to construct the future. The evaluation of bilingual education needs to look at recent past. For instance, I love this article by Garcia Lopez and Bruton, which are the potential drawbacks and actual benefits of CLIL. CLIL actually means Content Language Integrated Learning, which is the most common way of bilingual education in Europe. Initiatives in public secondary schools that you can find right here. Okay. Apart from the regular drawbacks that people have been able to find, especially students lying behind in content subjects, it's important to ensure that bilingual education students meet rigorous core curriculum standards and achieve high levels of academic success. Obviously, not only in the foreign language, in this case in English, but also in Spanish. Because in the end, in university, they are most likely going to study in Spanish. Therefore, Spanish or your own first language. Therefore, it's important to get them and to check that they learn evenly in the first language and the second language all the important contents. Many schools in Spain, for instance, have one session a week. If they do have 4 sessions a week in English, they have an additional 5th session which deals everything, and I mean everything, in Spanish. So students very much know the correlation between the language and the contents, both in Spanish and English. The second piece of research that I want to put forward is by Pérez Cañado, an amazing researcher in bilingual education in CLIL, who actually presents current research here in Europe with the past, present, and future International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism. Obviously, this is a little old-fashioned, but the most important thing is that the suggestions that she presents in that paper are just the way things have been evolving over the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously, she also mentions the importance of previous excellent research to date back most studies in Europe. Very much a position that I share myself. So what is the present evaluation of bilingual education? As Admiral and Westall and the board actually mentioned, the evaluation of bilingual secondary education is one of the most important things. In many countries, bilingual education actually began in primary education. However, today we are moving to secondary schools where there's also more important things, and it's a very good way to show the progress. For many of you, this article by Pérez, Lorenzo, and Pavón might also have a very great influence, which is the European bilingual models that are currently used in French. But I could actually increase this to European programs. The good thing about that paper is that It has a huge, I'd say, bibliography that indicates how we are moving forward in the last 2 years, and especially the year 2016. Obviously, it indicates the effects of introduction of multilingual education in very many parts of Europe. Finally, another article that I found very interesting is this one by Hugh Prince Solo, Makaga Mata, and Diderix on multilingualism in a system-wide assessment. Probably because the most important thing is that assessment is one of the areas that have been most neglected in bilingual education. Therefore, it's one of the curricular areas or one of the research areas that have more future in us today. Going on with this revision of bilingualism, this is a very local thing, but also very interesting, which is how we are doing things in bilingual education in Spain, especially in Madrid, because in Madrid we have an average of 80 to 85% of the schools, of the public schools, which are bilingual. Therefore, it means that we are growing future workers properly. All the other two, like this one, especially this one, also have a huge relation between what we are doing in second language in universities, for instance, in subjects like economics, physics, I'd say engineering, etc. That means that how CLIL is being used all through the different stages of education, both in schools and university. So now we are getting to the future and the most important things. For instance, this evaluation of what we learned. González Gándara in 2015 did an extensive research in one of the regions in Spain, and she found the positive effects of academic achievement through bilingual education. Please remember that back in the 90s, it was Jim Cummings himself who actually mentioned that bilingual students outcome students in monolingual classes in many ways, but mostly in literacy and mathematics. That obviously led to the exploration of bilingual CLIS perceptions. Here is in Catalonia, but you can use exactly the same model in your own countries, wherever you are coming from. Obviously, you need trainee teachers, but it's not only that you train your teachers, especially your content teachers, but it's as well that you need to basically get teachers who believe in the system, who believe in the methodology, who work together. Otherwise, there's no possibility to make bilingual education work. In that sense, the prospective studies, the prospective studies will have to address the following points that I state in here. Obviously, best practices. A lot of studies up to date have mentioned how good bilingual education is, but they never posed any interest or focused on how to make it better. So it's important to assure that most schools follow the best possible, obviously, the best possible guidelines. It's important to find what those are and what do have successful schools have as compared to other less successful schools, which is also the second part. What doesn't work in individual schools? If some of the schools are very good, what makes them so good? Therefore, I'd say that weaker schools can improve the way they are doing things. I'd say also that is important within the previous one. Find out in a large study in many parts what are the less productive content areas. Formally, many countries assume that I'd say foreign language instruction should be better addressed in subjects like social sciences, natural sciences, arts and crafts, physical education, etc. But the question is this that way? Or can we actually include also mathematics? Because to me, mathematics is one of the areas that have been neglected. For some kind of reason, parents don't really want to have mathematics in English, but I find that mathematics is mathematics or physics are common content subjects where bilingual education could work even better, because there are huge similarities in the language, vocabulary and expressions between both languages. The third important point for me is what makes individual students successful and what not. As I said before, a lot of studies have addressed the importance of vocabulary, especially vocabulary as the main source of increasing knowledge, but also what makes students get into trouble. This is something that it really needs to be addressed, mostly because students who actually at the age of, let's say, 9-10 years old have to drop out. They may have lost a huge amount of time in bilingual schools that maybe would be better in a monolingual. However, there's also a myth on this. And this is what actually happens in many parts of the world, especially in the United States. People who go to bilingual schools tend to think and to consider that, let's say that I know someone whose son, whose daughter went to a bilingual school and actually it failed. This is what I call the my neighbor failure syndrome. That means I always heard of someone saying that this is what actually happened to someone that he knew, but it's like an urban legend. In person, you have never met someone who had that problem. In fact, I only know one single person personally who has said, no, I want to move my child because apparently I think she's having a lot of problems with English, and I have the feeling that she's coming back basically because of the English language. So this is something that also needs to be addressed. And then for those kids, how do they transition to mainstream schools? What are the things that if you actually consider or think that you should drop out from a bilingual school, what are the things that you should address in order to get into monolingual schools? Another important thing, especially in countries where they have foreign language assistants, this is the case of Turkey, for instance, this is the case of Spain, this is the case of France and many other parts of the world, is like, what is the relationship between assistants and principal teachers? Because in reality, there's usually little communication, and probably people like myself have the feeling that the connection between one and the other is not as good. And many times, those assistants who may not even have the preparation to be teaching, let's say, sciences or any other subject that they are required to, because they just have a general training, they really don't know what they are expected to do. So it's important to see what their expectations are and if they are actually fulfilling those expectations. It's also important to see what is the use and misuse of second and first language. In relation to this, I have to say that obviously I'd say in foreign language learning, we assume that first language can be used at times. But this is more critical in bilingual education because we really need to have students who are competent in both languages. So what is the use, the misuse, and how to relate first language and second language. So going back to the future directions, Moore and Lorenzo in 2015 mentioned that we should follow through a task-based system, task-based learning and content through CLIL. That means that we should share guidance, initiatives, trends and projects in Spain and elsewhere through good practices. One of the problems that I have seen in many conferences all over the world is that there's a limited communication between teachers. This is especially difficult in countries where people and teachers are very reluctant to get all the teachers into their classrooms. So it's important to share again, not only within the same school, but also with other schools, what we are doing, organizing workshops, and etc. Okay? It's also important to identify resources for professional development. It's very unclear yet how to train specifically teachers who are going to be working in bilingual education. There are two main trends. One of them is to somehow include that matter when they are addressing teaching methods and didactics in the training for foreign language. And the second one is to have professional ongoing life learning workshops. But I have the feeling that both fall short. So I really think that it's necessary to also enlarge and somehow to address and to see ways, and obviously from the research aspect as well, to see those ways to make things more common, creating repositories, creating different ways, etc. It's also important to find ways to use local resources in schools like Guadalajara in Mexico, etc., where there's a huge integration of immigrants in EFL and bilingual education. We also miss sometimes the use of first and second language, and we may even have problems with the teachers because they may not be, I'd say, so competent in both languages. For instance, imagine those people, those assistants who come from abroad and are arriving to your country. Let's put places like, I'd say, Turkey or Denmark or Norway. Do they actually speak the local language as fluently? Do they understand all the problems that students may have? And that is something that also needs to be addressed in the future. More things that need to be obviously revised are the teachers' perspectives. I mentioned before that it's important to believe what you are doing. So bilingual education teaches beliefs and the relation to practice. It's important to point out. This is probably a kind of issue that it's been left aside for very many years. It was obviously said at the beginning, and there are some basic studies like that one that you have in front of you, but nevertheless we need to revise after very many years of implementation what it's been done, what do they think, if they do actually believe in what they are doing, because otherwise our possibilities to be able or to get unsuccessful are very high. It's also important to get to see how to balance content and language in instruction. The typical question in this case is very much like, I'd say, do content teachers teach content or language? Or are English teachers ready to somehow introduce technical issues, technical jargon, etc.? My friend Maria Luisa Cañado, who's an excellent researcher, over the last few years has been addressing the importance of having the English language as the basic for further bilingual education. We also have trainers like Angela Susic from Ukraine who believe that maybe CLIL or maybe bilingual education should be relabeled to a more extensive foreign language learning classes. That means including technical matters like people who studied like a few years ago when they addressed English for specific purposes in engineering, mathematics, or any nursing, medical tendencies, etc. Whether that is better than actually having bilingual education in schools. So we also have problems because, as I found myself, I went to a school very recently to see how they are doing, and the headmaster said that teachers are having problems with the assistants because they don't get that many as is expected, and sometimes they don't work as they were expected to work. And so I said, okay, how many teachers do you have who are fluent in English? And they said, well, we have in this school of 400 students, we have about 12 or 13 students who are in between C1 and C2 in English. And I said, why don't you use them? We have excellent teachers whose native language is obviously not English, but they are doing a fantastic job, and we are misusing those teachers who have a C1 or a C2. Therefore, I believe that if we were using the local resources, this would be very convenient for local schools. It is also important in that sense to make a construction or to somehow find the metaphor of the self in bilingual education, how to consider teachers and students themselves in relation to as learners or instructors. That obviously has future implications in training, teacher motivation, the teachers' effort, the teachers and students' effort, and the experience they acquire in the class. It is also important to get to see how, let's say, national schools are cooperating with other international schools, like some of those cases that we have seen before, to get better practices. The second issue that needs to address, obviously, is language policy. Language policy needs to be revisited, and it's important to actually suggest ways to improve language education. This is an excellent article on one part of south of France and also the north of Spain, that is the Basque Country, how to implement CLIL in different ways, and obviously whether they correspond, actually language and learning correspond to one each other. Okay. It's also interesting, this one, the stakeholder perspectives on CLIL in monolingual context, to see how CLIL can evolve in situations where, let's say, the foreign language is not as demanded as in others. Okay. In my opinion, it's very important. This is very important to me. Right here. To reinvent types of bilingual education that reshape and are accordingly to local situations in our countries. For instance, is bilingual education very much the same in Spain and, let's say, Turkey? Do we need to make any changes? Can we follow guidelines that come from California, etc.? We also need, as I mentioned before, to reconsider the subjects we are teaching in English. Okay, and then there's something like that, which is also strategic and organizational considerations in planning, content and language integrated learning. Okay, we move forward, and obviously before we come to an end, it's important to address other linguistic issues such as vocabulary learning, grammar instruction, language acquisition, I'd say, any other aspects of foreign language. Those are, and obviously their correlation between both languages, first and second. So those are things that people in the audience really want to address as well. it's important to see if for some kind of reason there's a balanced progress, obviously in the first and the second language, etc. Okay. We are coming to the beginning of our conclusion, which is the transitioning to every student's success. Okay, there are very many ways to address this and to research this. Obviously, as you can see here, HOTS and LOTS, which is a common thing, that it's the revision of higher and lower order thinking skills that you have in front of you. It's also important to see whether students are acquiring both languages balanced. For instance, if a student says something like "me duele el arm," that means in Spanish, my arm in English obviously, hurts me. Is this a balanced situation, or there is actually a problem with the acquisition of both languages at the same time? We also, when we reconsider the subjects we are addressing, is what kind of language we want to use in each one. Do we want English to be more technical, or do we want content areas to be more practical? Or what is the interaction between language and content? Also, very important and neglected is the digital literacy in relation to bilingual education. And then, obviously, attitudes and affective factors, etc. I have the feeling that in many countries a lot of schools are going back because they don't address the affective factors, and in very many occasions students actually feel alone because they don't have the conversations, they don't see. Let's put it in this way: there's a certain point that we need to understand where we are going and what is the situation like. I love one book that I read not too long ago. It was published by the British Council, and the title was "Don't worry, Mommy, I will end up by speaking English." That was very much the title, and it was written by a professor from University of Alcalá called Anna Halbach. And the thing about that one is that it's an excellent interpretation and communication of what we can expect from the students in the future, and also a way to communicate parents what is second language acquisition like. So for instance, if students keep a long time or keep silence for a long time, what does it mean? It basically means, if you remember Stephen Krashen, date back in 1970s, he said that bilingual children usually take longer to begin to speak, something that it's been basically supported by research after. So where are we? Are we able to speak to and to explain the administrators and parents what they are doing, etc.? So it's important to see how schools which are working fine are doing so. I want to conclude by the last two slides. The first one is about Lessons in Pedagogy by Víctor Pavón, which is also an excellent European researcher. He basically says that in the future, as you can see in there, we have to address the following, and I took this from his presentation at the UPCEL conference. We have to present the following aspects that need to be addressed in research. Class management, for instance, how, if there's, let's say, for instance, in infant education, if there's a specific issue on bilingual education and teaching through corners, for instance, or if it requires a different way of working cooperatively or working in groups, working together, etc. The second thing is task-based cooperative learning, which is addressed and obviously similar to the one before. I also mentioned materials, how to develop them, which ones work better. If there's such a thing as multiple intelligences, there's a huge debate on multiple intelligences, but if they actually exist, what is the correlation between multiple intelligences and obviously second language and bilingual education? Okay. Now, is there a counterbalance approach. That means what can be done in monolingual schools to basically catch up what is being done in foreign language in second language schools, because we, in the end, we need an homogeneous, say, perspective, national perspective in schools. Okay, teamwork and co-teaching, I mentioned that because assistants are usually, let's say, a source of problems because we don't understand them, because we cannot cooperate with them, etc. And obviously genre-based syllabus. I just want to conclude with some outcomes which are related to language, related to linguistic functions, how they work in bilingual education, classroom discourse, do we use exactly the same kind of instructions, etc. Pluriliteracies, grammar accuracy, social-linguistic and pragmatic use, and linguistic transference between one and the other language. These obviously are related to second language acquisition, and obviously there's a lot to do in this sense still today. And in relation to content, the conceptual knowledge, the procedural knowledge, and finally the thematic and interdisciplinary coordination among content subjects. I want to conclude that I want to say that I have my hopes in the future in bilingual education. I really believe it works, and I really believe there's an important thing to do in that sense, but we still need to research it, to work it properly. So my recommendation for those of you who might be interested is to begin to work, see how your country is going, see what can be done in your own land, etc. And if you have questions, since I am not able to be there, I'm going to leave you in the last slide my email. That will be okay, that is my email, just in case you want to send me questions, etc. So to conclude, thank you for attending the conference. Again, I am sorry I was not able to make it for you there, and I hope you have a fruitful and great conference. Thank you.